multilateralism, about all of those issues that you stated in your opener. But what role does the IMF, the World Bank, and such other institutions play in economic stranglehold for most of African countries? And if we're not going to the IMF or the World Bank, we are looking towards China. And I really have difficulty understanding sovereignty in the sense in which we are still, in many cases, tied to the economic apron strings of not just these institutions that I talk about, but these corporations. And then if we are not doing that, the EU, the European Union, the FCDOs, and such other organizations, I know that Trump, his unpredictability, has taken out his faith and his support from most of Africa. But as you can see, we are still completely tied up to the apron strings of this institution.
Yeah.
So I really have still problem understanding sovereignty, understanding multipolarity in a situation in which we are still tied to the apron strings of these institutions.
And we are going to understand better, because understanding will contextualize and mitigate the negative effects from the African continent. In the same perspective with you, Harley, it's true that in your introductory statement, you gave a whole, a holistic understanding of the topic. But then let's get more, insight on it, looking at probably the question like, what does the shift from unipolarity to multipolarity now mean for global governance, and how can this define, or can we define its core characteristics? Just to note that during I think it should be November 2024, when the president of Brazil was talking under the auspices of the G20, he reiterated the need to review the present status quo, especially along lines of the international or economic architecture, to meet the present realities. And so now let's try to understand this shift from unipolarity to multipolarity, and how it relates to existing governance structures. Harley, please, you're muted.
Okay, here I am. I'm very happy that the other participants were talking in the same basic language of the importance of sovereignty and the nations acting for the benefit of their people. Because the idea of multipolarity starts with the concept of mutual benefit. And that's something that we have not had in the last 500 years. The international trade system, the International Monetary Fund, has been controlled by the most powerful banks of the West. And they have very little concern with the necessities of nations to develop. Their idea is you get the cheap raw materials and cheap labor, and this was really institutionalized under the IMF system and then the World Trade Organization. Now, that was largely the result of the powerful corporate cartels and their conception of globalization. And I just think it's important to define a different concept of globalization, because the globalization of the World Trade Organization and the IMF means that the powerful countries determine the rules of the game, what Blinken called the rules-based order. The U.S. violates the rules all the time and makes them up again to benefit their own corporations. Now, there is something called international law, which we see ignored in the case of Israel going in and bombing Qatar. We see it ignored in terms of the treatment of the African countries when they are looking for credit, and they're told you have to pay the debt first. And the debt, who determines the size of the debt? So the most important shift I see is new institutions coming into existence, like the BRICS. It's going to take a while. It's going to be, as Arthur said, a turbulent period ahead for this transition, because these Western corporations won't give up power easily. But they're having their own financial problems. And I think the important thing is to look at these new institutions like the BRICS Bank, the SCO Bank, the Chinese credit policy, which is very different from the IMF. So I think these new institutions are coming into existence. There's going to have to be some patience, but toughness, and no submission to the old order and its phony rules.
And when we're talking about governance, we're looking at global governance, so patterning institutions like the United Nations Security Council. We are looking at, like you quite underlined, Harley. So now, with all that has been underlined, and we're already living the realities, let's look at the importance now, geopolitical importance of this topic, and how does the rise of multipolarity then influence the effectiveness and legitimacy of existing global governance institutions, which we just cited.
Well, as I was saying, I think these global institutions have outlived their purpose. I would not be unhappy at all to see the International Monetary Fund be dismantled. The structural adjustment programs that the IMF has come up with have done more to set back the process of development in the global south than wars. And that's why the need for new institutions is so crucial. And one of the things the Chinese are doing as an interim measure is to trade in national currencies. And this is going to require, again, some time to do, because you have to figure out how do you cover the imbalances and things of that sort. But the current system, the SWIFT system, is a weaponization by the Western banks of the financial system, with sanctions, with credit cutoffs, and the imposition of structural adjustment programs. So I think the quicker we leave behind the existing institutions, the better. And that doesn't mean we have a totally anarchistic junking of the system. But it's interesting to note the BRICS are not talking about dumping the dollar, but making it fair, making the US and Western Europe play by the same rules.
Absolutely, yeah, dear Ali. And still in the same line, understanding the topic with you, ultimately, we're looking at new realities of the world. And when we talk governance, a whole lot of things will come in, like democracy, constitutional, the republic, monarchy, and other forms of governance are existing. But then, when we look at probably the ideology of globalization that is changing every day, and we're looking at protectionist tendency, interest that is also at the fore. Let's now come to have your perspective patterning these major changes in the governance structure of global institutions. We know the US is a major power. We know China, we know Russia, and India. So do you think with all of this reality, it is very important to ensure that these countries, particularly global south countries representing other nations without permanent membership in the Security Council, can influence these major changes that we want along the lines of the economic decision making, and even some geopolitical decision making which have direct ramifications on nations even across the globe.
Well, you mentioned China and the U.S. and India and Russia as being the power centers. And what we have to start doing is rethinking geopolitics where we have new players. We've got new players coming into the system now. Of course, there's Brazil and African nations are coming more to the fore. South Africa in particular, Nigeria is becoming more of a player. And we've got a few other players out of Latin America, Venezuela, and Indonesia. And we need to understand that in order to fulfill this ideal of multipolarity and creating a more multipolar world in a system and in a situation where the direct forces for decades and centuries has been to make it a unipolar world or a bipolar world, and to shift from that to where we are now, I think is a wonderful thing for us to see and be a part of in our lifetimes. But we need to hasten the development of what is going on in places like Africa and Latin America and in Southeast Asia to allow those areas to develop more quickly and more structurally. Because my fear is if they don't understand how this shift is going to play out and how quickly it's going to play out, they can be overwhelmed and be thrown back into a situation where they are expected to be subsidized and essentially floated by organizations like the IMF and the World Bank, which Harley is just so eloquently characterized as really relics of the past. And we really have to put these organizations behind us, but we need to do it with new institutions and new organizations. And that means there needs to be a basic realization of where power is shifting in the world. Africa needs to step up its game in unification. The unification of African countries is the only way to enhance and develop the kind of strength and integrity that Africa needs so that it can join it can really assume its place at the world table of nations. And I mean a table with China and a table with the US and India and Russia as an equal, as a co-equal. And no individual country in Africa has the capacity to do that presently. You cannot do that unless there is consolidation of power. And I hope that Africans are understanding this opportunity and where they are at this moment in time to achieve that.
I think it is very imperative how you end it. Africans actually understanding their position at this point in time where dynamics are changing. With you, Mr. EZENWA, let's refer the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. When we look at South Africa today and some of the, some global diplomatic feuds which have been happening, we see that between the USA and South Africa, it has not been an easy ride lately. And a few days ago, President Ramaphosa said that South Africa will not be bullied into a trade deal with the United States, emphasizing that the nation is pursuing a strategic a strategy of engagement. And this brings us again to align with what has already been actually underlined by the experts so far under the theme of emergence of new powers. Here we want to look at diplomacy, which according to some pundit, it's becoming more cohesive for the interest of countries at the fore. So the question is, how do you think emerging powers, particularly like India, China, Brazil, and other countries across the African continent, which have recorded significant strides in terms of governance? I think we can be mentioning Rwanda here, can be mentioning Ethiopia, Egypt, and other countries are understanding already the global setting and making internal decisions that favor growth and development. So how are emerging powers forming these alliances, and what impacts do you think this partnership can affect global governance norms? Do you think that we have the impetus in Africa already to bring major changes in the global governance settings? Please, you are muted. Mr. EZENWA, please, you are muted. We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Sure, sir, I can hear you.
Okay, we will not be able to, Africa will not be able to do much if it does not come to the table with strength. And by that I mean economic strength. And I think the last speaker underlined and underscored the importance of first developing Africa. Mm-hmm. And it is on the basis of a developed Africa that you can engage the world. If you come to the table as a beggar or as a semi-beggar, you can't assert much. And the challenge of Africa really is that its leadership and its people have not thought more autochtonously in the sense. And so whether you're talking about South Africa-US relation, it is one in which the US is still thinking in terms of dominating because it wants to dictate the trade terms, it's dictating the immigration parameters. In fact, the Rwanda that you are talking about is part of those who are in a deal with the United States to bring violate international migration, conditions that are very clear, where you bring people that you claim are criminals and who you don't want, and you want to dump them in a country that they have no relationship. It is simply because we are not economically strong enough to be able to assert that. And the way to do that is to first develop internally in a way that you are strong enough to engage the world. And I'm not seeing much of that happening. There is a lot of, diplomatic finesse and talks that are going on. But internally, the governance system within most of African countries is anything to be desired at this moment. Whether in Nigeria or in Ghana or in Sierra Leone or in Freetown or in Egypt, the majority of the citizens of those places have not seen the impact of governance in a way that they can support the initiative for you to engage, whether it's India, Brazil, coming together. But it's important that there is that unification, that there's consolidation. You can borrow models, you can borrow muscles from each other. And the combination of your muscles can produce the strength with which you can become a major factor on the table in conversations that has to do with trade, that has to do with diplomacy, that has to do with governance, and that has to do with even how you play in this new multipolar picture that we are painting.
I will stay with you, Mr. EZENWA. Why highlighting what you said? It actually comes to mind for us to analyze politics versus governance in Africa, and how it's actually a limitation to the continent standing globally. Today we hear countries calling for seats or representation at the United Nations Security Council. I will take a clear example of the Republic of Cameroon for us to better understand this question. How probably, if actually the political tactics of nations what has actually have embedded or relegated its governance stride and force making the country or continent not viable enough at the decision making tables internationally. We want to look at the events marking the upcoming elections in Cameroon, that is October 12, 2025, political maneuvering, the failure of the opposition to come to a compromise. And when you look at critically, according to some pundits, it's more of an interest, a personal interest, rather than a national interest, which I think also has some sort of ramifications at the external diplomatic, geopolitical levels of the country. So now let us try to understand political tactics within Africa versus the existing governance and how to navigate it in a multipolar world.
Well, if there is the play of politics above economics, most of Africa is the conversation is more political than sorry. The conversation has been more political than economics. Most of our conversations are always about who gets to power, who contests for which position, and not really we undermine conversations that has to do with what kind of economics, what kind of political economy are we driving for our people. And once you superimpose politics on the major issue about what kind of economy are you running, what is your outlook, how are you engaging the world, whether it's the Chinese that we're talking about, whether it's the Indians we are talking about. India has created a place for itself in technology, in IT, and in medicine. You can't talk about India and wish them away in these areas that I've talked about. But where can you place Africa currently? So if you are going to the table, whether in the United Nations, what is your contribution to the United Nations? The Americans can dominate the Security Council. The Russians can dominate, because at the end of the day, they provide the resources with which even the United Nations itself. How much are you contributing to the pool? So until we play down politics and strengthen conversations about how to govern our people for the benefit of our own people, and strengthen them in a way that if your friend invites you for lunch, and every time he invites you for lunch, you go for lunch empty-handed, you are not playing your role in that table. If you are coming for the lunch, if he's providing food, you should come with a wine. If you don't come with a wine, you can't continue to claim that this relationship is a relationship of equal. You can be pretending that you are equals because your friend invites you to lunch. But until you contribute something to that lunch, you will not be able to assert yourself either as a friend or even as a contemporary.
Very imperative. Just to note, ladies and gentlemen, if you are just tuning in, this is a global insight proposed to you by Globus, and today we are looking at governance in multipolarity and how achievable or attainable it is, contextualizing every aspect of it. Coming back to you, Harley, we are looking at the fact that at the moment there is some, I don't know if you call it chaos in Europe. Let's be particular with France. The leadership of Emmanuel Macron is actually facing or is facing challenges at the moment, and then we see how this is also spiraling to the fragmented European Union in terms of global decision makings on issues of global ramifications, the position of the Ukrainian crisis, and how let's now see how the fact that Macron is not standing actually strong in terms of governance or governing his internal affairs in France is already a setback to the European Union as a bloc. And how can all of these dynamics be brought to the table for new frameworks that meets the new realities that will in turn mitigate the violence or economics of violence that we see across the bloc at the moment?
Well, when you're talking about Europe, you have the situation where you have the European Union, in which the individual nations no longer have sovereignty. Mm-hmm. And the power is in the hands of primarily the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. But these are three countries that have a commitment to, a strong commitment to continue the post-World War II order. And they're delusional in that they think they can do that. Now, that's why there's a war going on against Russia in Ukraine. The decision was made in 2014 with the coup in Ukraine to try to break the power of Russia. And why were they so upset about Russia? Well, Russia is a Eurasian country. Russia was orienting toward China, toward India, and toward the global south. Yeah. And Macron and the Germans, Merkel and then Scholz and now Merz, and then the string of mediocrities and brain-dead figures in the Prime Minister's position in England, believe that they still have the power to impose an imperial system. Now, this gets, I just want to throw something out here for the discussion of how you move from the unipolar to a multipolar world. You have to address the question of credit. And I think this is something where Africa does have a lot to bring to the table. What is backing up the currencies in the West right now? Nothing. It's speculation. They've shut down industry. They are not able to loot the developing sector the way they used to. And so they're in a pile of debt which is going to collapse. That's what happened to Bayrou and Macron. Mm-hmm. They can't cover the debt. That's what's happening in the United States. And the fact that the United States is a military power doesn't negate the fact that it can't pay its bills. So what is the basis of credit? And this is where we can learn something from China, which has learned something from the better times of the economies in the West. Credit is based on your ability to increase and improve your productivity based on investment, and that means debt, in scientific and technological progress. That's how you increase your wealth. African countries have been denied that right by the colonial system. And by putting them in debt so that they have to trade their raw materials and their labor force for the to maintain any kind of credit. But real credit can be generated internally, and that's why the new banks represent an alternative. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization Bank, the BRICS Bank, and by moving into this new era of sovereign credit systems, national credit, national banking, you create the basis for the equalization of power, which has been denied by the looting and predatory practices of the IMF and others. So I think this, when you talk about governance, this is really one of the key points. How do you establish agreements on credit policy? And the step toward that now is national currencies, and especially China trading with the convertible yuan, The Saudis are doing that. This is the whole shift underway. And Macron and others are saying, no, we don't like it, and we're going to fight it.
And resisting actually is what has left the world fragmented. You want to say something in line with that, Otto Mobley?
Sure.
Okay.
I would just venture to say that Africa, again, has a amazing opportunity right now to essentially grab the attention of the world, but it can only do it if there is a movement in Africa towards unification. What's going on in the Sahel right now is a great idea. The states in the Sahel have the correct approach to this by consolidating. When you're talking about Guinea and Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso and now Chad and possibly Senegal becoming a combined state, a combined effort to move forward and speak with one voice, or at least a unified position among that region. That's the key. If I told you, or if I asked you, what are the 5 most powerful countries in the world right now, you would say the US, China, India, Russia, Canada. And then if you just thought about it, the geography that's involved says simply that those are the largest countries in the world. Size matters. If you don't control territory, then you cannot prosper. Europe has adopted, and what Harley was just speaking about in terms of the EU. The EU was just a fancy way to re-emerge Europe as one consolidated force, one consolidated instrument of power. All of the states of Europe are now united under that EU flag. Africa, even though it has an AU, has not moved or transgressed to the level of power consolidation that is apparent and has been apparent in Europe for decades and centuries. So Africa has to understand and learn this is how the game is played. You can't participate in the game if you just want to come in and sit at the table. Africa has the capacity to bring a whole new table into the room and seat everybody at the African table. Africa has the resources. Africa has the extensive ability to marshal its own human resources. It has a vibrant young population that will be a powerful force for brokering as Africa goes forward. But we have to think more clearly. We have to think more in a specialized way of how does power work? How does geography work? And how can we take advantage of this situation to the benefit of Africa in this multipolar world?
And taking advantage is understanding how global governance work. It's understanding how diplomacy works, and it's understanding what is beneficial for the population. Still bringing us now to the challenges that we still face, or Africa faces as a continent, and other emerging countries that have actually challenged the traditional status quo of the global diplomacy. Here we want to look at what is actually stopping inclusivity in terms of global governance, and how probably resistant countries have become. Coming back to you, Mr. EZENWA, here we see that African countries that still actually indulge in borrowing from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and we still see that the revolutionary states, particularly Burkina Faso has been able to make some developmental projects using, financing it internally without borrowing. So it brings us again to a major problem, which I would love that you underline. What actually is that problem embedded in governance that has not pushed Africans to relook the credit status quo, as noted that the realities are already known to us. So what is that impediment stopping us, or major stakeholders or policy makers, particularly at the political level, towards changing or bringing the new table, like also Mobley said, that will actually limit the debt burdens of countries across the African continent?
Well, I think you were breaking towards the end, but I think that the first thing is the issue of ideology. How do you look at yourself? What do you believe? Mm-hmm. Do you think yourself as that you have the competencies, that you have the capacity to bring the changes? I don't think I'm comfortable with referring to Burkina Faso and Mali and all these other the Sahelian play as revolutionary. I think that no matter what it is, we must be able to clearly do not give comfort for people who take power in an undemocratic way. We cannot. I don't think we should give them that kind of comfort.
Sorry to interject, Mr. EZENWA. If we understand the narratives of our topic this day, we can still see that there is probably a word that has been coined as transformational, dictatorship. And today, when we're looking at governance in multipolarity, and the realities coming from the traditional powers, we still question what democracy is all about. And at the end, we are putting the interests of a nation at the fore. So how then can we complement all of these aspects?
Clarisse, I do not agree with you. I don't think there is. If you could call it transformational, you could call it benevolent dictatorship. But the truth of the matter is that for us in Nigeria, who saw through military rule and who sacrificed our youth to return to democracy, there is not going to be any excuse that is good enough for people to take power through option AK-47 and defend it under a pseudo, revolutionary transformative slogan. I don't want to share that. I want to think that we must prioritize first freedoms. It is under a free environment that people can think, that creatives can thrive, and the energies of your people can be harnessed for strength and development. And so when you have a one-man show, and whatever you want to, in whichever coloration or complexion you want to put it, I would want to set that aside. But coming back to your conversation, I'm thinking much more that we need to have leaders who are thinking more in terms of developing strengths of their own people to be able to advance whatever it is they want to advance in the world. And one of the ways you can look at Rwanda, even though it does not, for me, exemplify clearly what I would want in terms of freedoms, but it clearly harnesses the energies of its own people, and it can stand up to whether it's the World Bank, the IMF, and such other depressive, international organizations that are holding Africa down. It's an issue of ideology. If we begin to prioritize our worldview to factor in the strengths, the what we have within, the economic, capabilities of Africa and then borrow these models across Africa. Whether you are talking about Congo, you are talking about Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Botswana, Cameroon, coming together economically will present a much stronger, issue under a free rule-based governance system than one in which we are eulogizing, for me, what you call transformative dictatorship. I don't want to share that.
Actually, it's not me calling it transformation dictatorship, but it's the viewpoint of a school of thought trying to internalize whatever is happening across the continent and the global world, that the discrepancies created within the European Union and other countries out of the continent have brought the realities of this global world of governance, and it brings us again. That's why in the first segment of this conversation, I actually loved that we contextualize definition of terms, not to be caught up in the web, and coming again to you to probably get more understanding and clarity when it comes to dictatorship, transformation, and governance roles or models which actually do not benefit the entire population. With you, HARLEY SCHLANGER, I know that the Schiller Institute has been expanding in the African sphere understanding. Do we see a problem of ideology or political tactics, or actually some sort of the model of the governance which is a setback for Africa to thrive practically in this multipolar world?
Well, I'll say something that might be controversial, but the question of ideology, as our colleague from Nigeria was saying, is crucial.
Sure.
And one of the ways the European colonial system dominated is by imposing a Western view on the people in Africa. And this is where we see the ability to divide and conquer. That's what geopolitics is about. How do you divide people up? Now, look at it from the standpoint of the oligarchy in the West. What was their greatest fear about Africa? This came out in a document that Henry Kissinger pushed through in 1975 called National Security Study Memo 200. And he said the great threat to the West from Africa is population growth. And why is that a threat? Well, if you have nations that are under good governance, they're working on the future, where they're working to ensure that the young people will have opportunities in the future. And this is what the West has been trying to stop in terms of the thinking of governments in Africa. And that's why you see the civil wars and the weapons trafficking and drugs and everything else to divide countries apart. So I think the question that's been brought up a couple times of a unity, of a